Alrighty, so as always, the notes that we're going over today, I'm recording us going through them as a class, and then once we're done with Zoom and I get the video uploaded and processed and all that good stuff, I'll stick it right in our Zoom class video section on the site under the Muscular System Notes tab right here, just like all of our other videos so far. And if you ever want to go back and take a look at the notes yourself, we are on, again, October is here already, time for spooky, spooky times. It's the first day of Halloween, as my friend likes to say. And so today we're going over the muscular system, the different tissues that are involved and how it creates movement in our body, right here. All right, give me 1 second. All right. Sorry about that. My dog was hanging out in the office and then she decided that she no longer wanted to be hanging out in the office. And what she says goes. So I had to oblige. Alrighty, muscular system. All of the different muscles that are contained within and throughout our body. So we have a lot of muscles in our bodies. There's the ones that you normally hear about, like the biceps and triceps in your arm, and the quads in your leg and your calf muscles. But really, pretty much everywhere under your skin is crisscrossed with different types of muscular system muscles. So a lot of our weight, almost half of your entire body weight, is built out of muscles. So the other half is all of your bones, your organs, your brain, your skin. That's all one half, and then your muscles is almost the other half. And then, like I said, there's a little over 200 bones in the human body, but there are 650 different muscles in our body. And we're going to be going through each and every single one in full detail today. Just kidding, we're not going to do that. I probably couldn't even tell you 550 of the muscles. There's just a lot of them. And a lot of them have very confusing and hard to pronounce names, so I just like to skip over those. So just like the bones, our muscles are there to give us shape and form, right? Your body does not look like skin stretched over a skeleton, right? It would look kind of creepy if it did. But we have all these muscles underneath our arm, and that's what makes us all fleshy and squishy. One important thing about muscles that you may not think about is that a lot of our body heat comes from our muscular system. So as humans, we have an internal temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the optimal temperature that all of our cells and organs work at, which, as you may be aware, is hopefully warmer than most of the places you are existing, whether you are outside or inside. Hopefully, especially in October, you are not somewhere that is 98.6 degrees. So we constantly have to be producing heat within our body in order to keep us at that specific temperature. And muscles are where a lot of that body heat comes from, because muscles need a lot of energy being burned in order to keep up the work that they are doing. So there are three major functions of our muscular system that we've kind of mentioned in passing already. There's probably the most common one is movement. The reason we're able to move, the reason I can move my hands all around when I'm talking to you guys over the Zoom camera is thanks to our muscles. Every single movement in your body is coordinated by your muscles, whether it's a voluntary movement, like moving your arms and legs, or whether it's one of those involuntary movements, like stuff going through your stomach or your heart beating. All of that is muscles. They also help give you your posture, so the form and shape of your body is based on your muscular system. Even if we had our skin and our organs and our bones, we wouldn't be able to stand or walk or remain upright if it wasn't for our muscles, helping us stay that way. And then, like I mentioned, very important for body heat and temperature. Keeping that ideal temperature of 98.6 degrees requires burning a lot of fuel, and your muscles are what are responsible for doing a lot of that burning. In fact, if you ever look at the breakdown of where the calories go in your body, like if you ever want to like keep track of your calories because you're trying to lose weight or something, there are calculators online that can determine, based on your height and weight and stuff like that, how many calories are you supposed to be eating in a day. And so like when they say it's recommended like 2,000 calories is an average day for a person, if you look into the breakdown of that, a ton of those calories are going into just maintaining your body heat. So I forget exactly what the number is, but I want to say it's something like out of a 2,000 calorie diet, 14 to 1,500 of those calories just go into maintaining your body temperature. So that means literally, if you just sit completely still, like you're passed out in a coma for 24 hours, your body is going to burn through 14 or 1,500 calories just keeping your internal body temperature at 98.6 degrees. So it's an extremely important and energy consuming process, and it happens a lot in our muscles. So here's just kind of a rough overview of some of the sort of major groups of muscles. And as you can see, the reason why we have 650 different muscles in our body is because our muscles are usually not just one big solid piece of muscle. Instead, there are lots of these smaller muscles that get kind of stacked on top of each other or combined with other groups of muscles in order to create the bigger muscle groups that we're aware of. So all of these different strips on these two skinless people running around over here are all technically, from an anatomical standpoint, different muscles, and they all have their own names, which is not something that we're going to even attempt to deal with today. But there they are. All right, so probably the major thing that we're going to talk about today, and the most important thing for you guys to know about muscles, is the three major types of muscle tissue. So not every single muscle in your body is created equally. There is skeletal muscle, there is smooth muscle, and there is cardiac muscle. And so today we're going to focus on each one of these types of muscles individually and talk a little bit about what they do and what makes them similar or different from all the other different types of muscles in our bodies. So the skeletal muscle has all of these little kind of stripes, these striations going along in it. Smooth muscle is a little bit more kind of stretched out and smooth looking, hence the name. And then cardiac muscle also has a whole bunch of those little striations, and it's located in one very specific area of the body, which you can probably guess by looking at its name. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Ooh, Matt thinks he has a guess. Is he correct? Probably, but we'll find out in a couple slides. All right, so whenever you're thinking of the muscles in your body, you probably 9 out of 10 people will think of skeletal muscles. So these are all the big muscles that you think of as muscles, right? So your biceps, your triceps, your deltoids, your quads, your hamstring, all of that is skeletal muscle. And like we've talked about before, how scientists love naming things because of exactly what they are. Skeletal muscle is called skeletal muscle because it's attached to your skeleton. This is muscle that is attached to bones. And so all those muscles that are attaching to those irregular bones and those flat bones, those are all skeletal muscle. They have this kind of stripy appearance like we talked about. And these muscles are the muscles that are voluntary. So we have control over these muscles. We can move our finger or our wrist or our forearm or our whole arm, or we can twist our torso around or kick our legs or turn our head. We can bend and do yoga and stretch ourselves out into all sorts of different positions, all due to the control that we exert over skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscle does not move until it gets a direct signal from the nervous system, from the brain, saying, hey, the human wants to move their right foot up and right foot out. So do that. That is what the skeletal muscle is for, to do what we say when we want to move. The muscle, we're not going to super focus on that right now. They're in these little cell bundles called muscle fibers. So if you ever heard about somebody tearing or snapping their muscle fibers, it's talking about the muscle cells essentially. So the thing about skeletal muscle is that since we have direct control of it, it is very fast moving compared to the other muscles. So it almost immediately reacts to the signal it gets from our brain. So it's very quick to contract. We can move our arm in and out and punch really, really fast because of this really fast reaction time of the skeletal muscles. On the flip side of this, compared to the other types of muscles, skeletal muscles fatigue relatively easily, right? We can't keep up a very intense set of exercises or workouts for like dozens of minutes or hours or days, right? Especially not days, right? If you lift something heavy above your head, within several seconds to a minute, your arms are going to let you know, hey, please stop doing this. We're getting tired. We want you to put us down. So they can't hold these movements for a really long period of time. We got fast reactions, but they run out of gas pretty quickly. So these are the skeletal muscles. These are our movement muscles. These control how our body bends and moves. All right. Any questions, concerns, comments about skeletal muscles or muscles in general so far? All righty. So skeletal muscles attached to bone, give us movement, we control them. They move quickly, but tire easily. Our next type of, oh, sorry, I meant to mention this. So muscle is usually attached to bones at tendons. And so if you ever hear of somebody like bruising a tendon versus bruising a ligament, a tendon is where the muscle is attached to the bone. And then ligaments are where bones are connected to each other. So you have ligaments around your joints, but you have tendons around where the bone and the muscle are connecting. So muscles are attached usually to 2 bones, sometimes more bones if they're attached to a whole bunch of those small irregular bones. And then the ends of our skeletal muscles attached are what anchors that muscle to the bone. So it forms that tendon and anchors it to the bone. And a little bit later today, we'll talk about why it's so important for muscles to be attached to 2 bones, right? It's very not useful if they're just attached to one for reasons that we'll talk about in a little while. So next type of muscle that we've got is our smooth muscle. This is not attached to our skeleton and it doesn't help us move our body around. Instead, it is also sometimes called organ muscle. So this is the muscle that's part of our digestive system. So this is doing that peristalsis that's helping to move all of our food through our system. It's found inside of our blood vessels. So our arteries and veins have a little bit of muscle tissue surrounding them, and that's what allows them to contract and expand. In women, the uterus is a lot of smooth muscle. that for the most part is not super active until going through the process of pregnancy and especially childbirth. The smooth muscle in the uterus all of a sudden gets way more active. And so it lines some of our different important organs in our system. Because of this, our smooth muscles are involuntary, right? We've talked about before, you can't control how slowly or how quickly food moves through your digestive system. You can't control your blood vessels getting thinner or getting wider, right? That's something that happens all automatically without your direct involvement. So we cannot consciously send a message from our brain directly to our stomach or to our blood saying, hey, I want you to do this. That's not how it works. This guy works as part of that autonomic nervous system, that automatic signal that gets sent out. So one of the benefits of being involuntary is that smooth muscle isn't quite as reactive as our skeletal muscle. It's a little bit slower moving. It takes its time doing stuff. But because of that, this muscle does not fatigue as easily. It can keep working over a really long period of time, right? Like your blood vessels have blood moving through them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So they constantly have to be ready to expand and contract as the heart pumps and the heart relaxes. Same thing with your stomach, right? Your stomach never gets halfway through digesting a meal and then is like, oh, you know what? I gotta stop right here. I'm too tired. We're gonna have to finish up this digestion later, right? No, that's not how it works. Sure, you might get stomach aches sometimes and it might feel like that's what's happening, but it's usually because there's something wrong going on in there. It's not because your stomach muscle is cramping and can't push any more food through. It's gonna keep working, keep pushing that food as long as you give it food to push. So not part of our movement system, but part of our organ systems. We don't control smooth muscle. It all happens automatically. Plus side of that is that it can last for a long time. It doesn't get tired out partway through doing the job that it's supposed to do. All right. Any questions about our smooth muscle? Alrighty. So our last type of muscle is sort of similar to the smooth muscle, except it's a very kind of specific, very important type of smooth muscle, and it's called cardiac muscle. And ding, 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 just like Matt suggested earlier, cardiac muscle is found only in the heart. Our heart is the only place in our entire body where cardiac muscle is found. None of the other structures in our body have cardiac muscle. So sort of like our smooth muscle, it's striated, meaning it has those little stripes in it if you look really close. But like our smooth muscle, like our skeletal muscle, it's striated and has those stripes. But like our smooth muscle, it is involuntary. So I mentioned this during the circulatory system, but you, as a human person, never have to think about your heartbeat, right? You can put your hand over your heart and feel it beating away, but you never have to focus and make sure you keep your heart beating, right? You never have to worry about going to sleep and forgetting to make your heart beat. It happens automatically. It literally has to happen every single second of every single day on your life if you want to stay alive very long. So this is totally on automatic. This is just going and going and going and going without any direct input from us, right? Sometimes there might make things speed up your heartbeat, like when you get anxious or frightened of something. Some things might slow down your heartbeat, like if you're meditating or you go to sleep, but that all happens automatically. You never have to focus and make your heart speed up or slow down. One of the super cool things about our heart is that the cardiac muscle cells of our heart are fused together, which means that when one heart cell contracts, all of the heart cells in that group contract at the same time. All right, so with our other types of muscles, the cells are all contracting independently based on what signals they're getting from the neurons. In heart cells and cardiac muscle cells, everything contracts at the exact same moment. So this is really useful because our heart is all about moving our blood around efficiently. We want that blood to get to the lungs as quickly as possible to pick up that oxygen. And then when it comes back, we want it to go out as quickly as possible and go through our body and drop off all of that good oxygen. So by having these fused cells, the heart is making sure that when it contracts, it's getting all of the cells to work together at the same time to push that blood out of the heart and get as much blood out of the heart at the same time as possible. So we have two different areas where the cells in the heart are fused: the atrial cells up top and the ventricle cells on the bottom are the two sets that are fused together. So when our atria contracts, remember when we have to move the blood from the atria to the ventricles, all of the atrial cardiac muscle cells contract at the same time, push that blood into the ventricles. And then when our ventricles contract, all of the ventricle cells contract at our same time, squeeze really hard, and push that blood out of the body, or out of the heart, excuse me. So this all or nothing, this one contraction leading to everything contraction, allows for a really powerful pushing around of the blood, essentially. Also, like smooth muscle cell, our heart muscle does not tire easily, which is very important for us because, like I mentioned before, every single second of every single day you're alive, your heart should be beating. So hopefully sometime in like year 42, your heart muscle doesn't tire out and be like, okay, that's it, I'm done, I'm good. That would be bad. That would not be good for our long-term survival. So the heart can just keep going and going and going and going and going. Now, obviously, there are a lot of things that might cause issue with the heart beating, like clot forming and causing blood not to be able to flow correctly through the heart, or blood vessels having too much plaque in them, like from cholesterol, leading to the heart having to pump a little bit extra hard in order to get the blood around. But your cardiac muscles are never just gonna like tire out at some random point, right? They can just keep going and going and going as long as your heart stays relatively healthy. So similar to the smooth muscle, we don't control our heart cells. It's on the automatic system, our autonomic nervous system. It's not going to tire out on its own anytime soon. But the cool thing about them is this all-for-one response. So as soon as it gets that automatic signal from the nervous system, all of the cells of a region will contract all at the same time. All right, any cardiac muscle questions or any questions about any of the muscle types that we've talked about so far? Alrighty then. So the last thing that I want to talk about with you guys tonight is how our skeletal muscles in particular work with our skeletal system in order to create movement. So I mentioned that skeletal muscles are attached to our bones, and the reason why we're able to move around is because the muscles pull on our bones. So whenever we have a contraction of one of our skeletal muscles, it's pulling one bone called the insertion bone closer to another bone called the origin bone. So we mentioned earlier that muscles have to be attached to at least two bones. And the reason for this is that when muscles contract, they do that in order to pull one bone towards the other. So the type of movement that happens depends on the joint that's between the two bones. If we're talking about our elbow, which is a hinge joint, we just get our arm moving back and forth with the muscles either pulling on this part of our arm or pulling back on that part of our arm. Or it could be muscles up by our shoulder that pull and that are big groups of muscles that work together in order to move our arm in a specific direction that we want it to go. So sometimes it's a very simple movement of just two muscles working together, but usually there are so many muscles in our body that there are big groups of muscles that will work together in order to produce a specific movement. So muscles, all about pulling our bones closer to each other, essentially in a specific direction. And then the kind of movement that that produces is all based on the joint where those bones meet up. So one really important thing to keep in mind about muscles is that our nervous signal, when it hits our muscles, the only thing that it can do is cause them to contract, right? So there's not a signal from our brain that tells our muscles, okay, now relax and push. Muscles only pull. What that means is, if we have one muscle that pulls our bones in one particular direction, we need at least one more muscle that will pull our bone in an opposite direction. So muscles always work in pairs. Every single muscle in our body has a muscle that works kind of against it or in its opposite direction. So when we're moving around and when we're moving like your arm in a bicep curl, essentially, you have your arm and then your brain says, okay, I want to bring our forearm closer to us. So your bicep contracts and that pulls your arm in. And then you go, okay, I want to move my arm in the opposite direction. Well, your bicep is already contracted. It can't do anything else. So you need an opposite muscle on the bottom part of your arm, your tricep, that then contracts down here and pulls your arm out in the opposite direction. So when one muscle gets the signal to contract and pull, the other muscle that's its opposite is no longer getting that signal, so it's able to relax and let that second muscle pull in the other direction. And so that's how muscles work together in order to produce movement. One muscle contracts as the other relaxes, and that pulls the bone in one direction. And then the second muscle contracts while the first relaxes, and that pulls the bone in the other direction. Without your tricep muscle down here, once your bicep muscle contracted, your arm would be stuck in this position forever. Because your brain would say, okay, bicep, you don't have to contract anymore, you're good. And then your bicep will say, okay, I'm done contracting. But there's nothing to move your arm to a different direction, right? If there's no muscle down here, then even when your bicep is relaxed, it can't push your arm away. That's not what muscles do. They only pull. So your arm would be stuck like this forever. Luckily, human bodies didn't end up evolving like that. We have our opposite muscle on the bottom, And so when that gets the signal to contract, it pulls and releases your arm. Now, obviously, muscle contractions in our skeletal muscles, unlike the heart, are not all or none contractions, right? When you move your arm in, you can move it all the way towards your body, but you can also move it just this far, or just this far, or just this far. So we have a lot of fine motor control over our skeletal muscles. We can cause them to contract a little bit, or we can cause them to contract a lot, depending on what sort of signal they get from our nervous system. And that depends on how we want to move. So here's kind of a picture of what I was just demonstrating with my own arm. So we want our arm to move in. The brain tells the biceps to contract. Our bicep muscle is attached at our shoulder and on one of our arm bones over the top of the elbow. So our bicep kind of goes and attaches like right here-ish on your arm. And so when it says contract, your bicep contracts and pulls the arm. Here, let me do some drawings. So when your biceps contract, your arm gets pulled this way. Your triceps aren't getting any signals from your brain, so they're in the relaxed state. They're not going to do anything about it yet. Then your brain says, okay, I want my arm to go the other way. So the biceps are no longer being contracted. Instead, your tricep muscles contract, and your arm, which used to be pulled out kind of like this, gets pulled by your tricep, which connects right past your elbow on the underside of your arm right here. So this pulls your arm out this way and straightens your arm back out again. It would pull your arm even further if it could, but your joint right here says, okay, that's enough. That's as far as you go. And so our bicep is no longer getting any signal from our brain, so it's relaxed. But again, even if over here our biceps start to relax, this arm would not move until these triceps started to contract and pull it in the opposite direction. So the main two things to keep track of here, the number 2 is going to come up a lot just now. So each muscle has to be attached to 2 different bones in order for movement to happen, right? Because if there was a muscle that was just attached to one bone, then if it contracts, nothing happens. It just pulls on either end of the bone. No movement is going to happen because we need our muscles to pull one bone or one set of bones to the other set of bones. And so each muscle that produces movement has to be connected to at least 2 bones, so it can pull one towards the other. Other important thing to keep in track of is that muscles work at the very least in groups of 2. So there might be a lot more muscles that get involved in certain motions, but for the simplest movements, like around a hinge joint, like at your elbow, hinge, we have 2 sets of muscles, and when one contracts, the other one relaxes, and then in order to reverse that movement, the second muscle has to contract while the first relaxes. So each muscle is attached to at least 2 bones, and muscles have to work in pairs in order for movement to happen. All right, okay, you go away, come back. All right. Any final questions about muscles, muscle types, muscle movement, attachments to bone, anything about muscles that you want to hear a little bit more about or are still a little confused on. Oops. Dang, I always forget that the pictures I draw are not attached to the slide. They are just kind of floating on the screen. There we go. All right. So that is our notes on the muscular system. Told you guys it was going to be a little bit short and sweet today. So we have our 3 main types of muscle tissue and how muscles create movement by working with our skeletal system. So the assignment for today, which again, since you guys are here on the Zoom call, I have you marked down as you're getting your attendance. And so you do not have to do this later on tonight if you don't want to, but it's a pretty quick and easy one if you want to get it out of the way. Our Thursday assignment is a super simple worksheet about the different types of muscle tissue. So essentially, we have a whole bunch of different characteristics that muscle tissues have. And so we have our muscle types up here at the top. And so for each one of these descriptions, I want you to tell me which one of these muscles matches this description. Now, obviously, hopefully you should realize that some of these descriptions may have more than one type of muscle tissue that goes with them. And so you're essentially just going to go through and be like, okay, I think that skeletal and smooth muscle go into the heart, but that only cardiac muscle is in the stomach, but skeletal and cardiac muscle have an all or none response. All right. None of those are correct, by the way. So hopefully I didn't give anything away with any of that. Essentially, you're just going to put a check mark for each type of muscle that matches the description over here, keeping in mind that you might have 2, I was about to say possibly even 3, but I don't think there's any 3 check mark ones. You could have more, you could have up to 2 muscles that match each description. If you like doing it on the Google Doc version, it's basically the same thing. Whoops, that's not the right thing. There we go. It's basically the same thing, just in chart form instead of being a little check mark box. And so all I have to do is just write the word yes in each box that matches the description. So instead of clicking to put a check mark, you're just going to write in yes for the ones that match correctly. And that is pretty much that, ladies and gentlemen. So, any final muscle-related questions for tonight? Anything about the muscle types or the muscle movement or the assignment that you still have questions on?